Ladies, once a man lives alone long enough, he begins to understand himself in ways he never did before. In the beginning, solitude feels temporary, almost accidental. He tells himself it's just a phase, just a break between relationships, just time to reset. But days turn into months, and months quietly become years. During that time, he builds a life that functions without anyone else's presence. He learns his own rhythms, his own limits, and his own needs. And whether he realizes it or not, that independence reshapes how he sees women forever. Living alone teaches a man responsibility, not the kind that comes from obligation, but the kind that comes from self-reliance. If something breaks, he fixes it or lives with it. If he's tired, there's no one else to carry the load. If he fails, there's no one else to blame. Over time, this creates a quiet confidence, not arrogance, not pride, but a deep understanding that he can stand on his own. When a woman eventually enters his world, she is no longer seen as someone to rescue him or complete him. She is seen through a different lens, one shaped by self-sufficiency. A man who has lived alone long enough stops romanticizing relationships. He no longer believes that love is supposed to be chaotic or dramatic. He has spent too many nights enjoying silence, too many mornings moving at his own pace to be impressed by emotional roller coasters. He begins to associate peace with happiness. So when he looks at a woman, the first question in his mind is not how attractive she is, but how she makes him feel. Does her presence calm him or does it drain him? Does she add clarity to his life or confusion? At this stage, a man becomes extremely protective of his space. His home is no longer just a place to sleep. It is his sanctuary. It represents effort, growth, and survival. He notices how a woman treats that space. Does she respect it, or does she try to change it immediately? Does she understand boundaries, or does she see boundaries as rejection? These details matter more than words. A man who has lived alone long enough listens less to promises and more to behavior. He also becomes more patient and less desperate. Loneliness no longer scares him the way it once did. He has already faced it, sat with it, and learned how to live alongside it. Because of that, he does rush into connection. He does chase just for validation. He tolerate inconsistency just to avoid being alone. If a woman comes and goes, he lets her. If she tests him with games or uncertainty, he steps back. He knows that peace is harder to rebuild than relationships are to replace. A man who has spent a long time alone also begins to see emotional maturity as attractive. He notices how a woman handles conflict, disappointment, and disagreement. He pays attention to whether she communicates or explodes, whether she listens or only reacts. Drama, which once felt exciting, now feels exhausting. He understands that attraction without stability leads to stress, and stress is the enemy of the life he has worked to build. At the same time, living alone softens a man in ways people rarely talk about. He learns empathy by sitting with his own struggles. He learns appreciation because no one else is there to provide comfort automatically. When a woman shows kindness, understanding, or genuine care, he does take it lightly. He sees effort clearly because he knows what it takes to give effort without support. He values a woman who can be emotionally present without being emotionally demanding. When such a man looks at a woman, he also sees partnership differently. He's not looking for someone to manage him or mother him. He is looking for someone who walks beside him, not ahead of him and not behind him. Independence attracts him because he understands independence. A woman who has her own life, her own identity, and her own sense of self feels familiar and safe to him. He respects strength because he had to build his own. He also understands loss more deeply. Living alone long enough means saying goodbye to people, opportunities, and versions of himself. Because of that, he doesn't threaten to leave during arguments, and he doesn't stay where he is constantly disrespected. He knows the weight of absence, and he knows the cost of staying where he is not at peace. This makes his love quieter but stronger. When he commits, it is not impulsive. It is deliberate. A woman who enters the life of a man like this may not feel chaste in the traditional sense. He may not overwhelm her with constant attention or grand gestures at the start. But what he offers instead is consistency. His interest doesn't spike and disappear. His words align with his actions. He doesn't pretend to be someone else to impress her because he no longer needs approval to feel worthy. Once a man lives alone long enough, he sees a woman not as a fantasy, but as a reality. He understands that love is not about being entertained. It is about being understood. It is not about possession. It is about mutual respect. And it is not about filling emptiness, because he has already learned how to live full on his own. The woman he chooses is not chosen out of fear of being alone, but out of desire to share a life that already stands solid without her. Once a man lives alone long enough, solitude stops feeling like something that needs to be escaped. In the early stages, being alone can feel uncomfortable, even frightening. Silence feels loud. An empty space feels like a reminder of what's missing. But over time, that silence becomes familiar. The space begins to breathe. A man starts to hear his own thoughts clearly, without distraction, without interference, without anyone else's expectations shaping his decisions. That internal clarity changes the way he views relationships, and more importantly, the way he views women. Living alone teaches a man discipline in subtle ways. No one is watching him. No one is correcting him. No one is praising him. He wakes up because he must, not because someone tells him to. He works, eats, rests, and survives on his own schedule. This independence creates a standard that he carries into every interaction. When a woman enters his life, he subconsciously measures how her presence fits into the system he has already built. He's no longer trying to mold himself to please someone else. He's asking whether the connection makes sense within the life he has learned to manage alone. A man who has lived alone long enough begins to associate peace with progress. Chaos no longer feels like passion. Emotional instability no longer feels exciting. He has spent too many quiet nights rebuilding himself to confuse turbulence with love. So when he looks at a woman, his attraction goes beyond appearance or charm. He notices tone, patience, and emotional control. He observes how she reacts when things don't go her way. He watches how she treats people when no one is watching. These small moments tell him more than any grand declaration ever could. He also becomes extremely aware of emotional energy. Living alone makes him sensitive to how interactions affect him internally. After spending time with someone, he notices whether he feels lighter or heavier, calmer or drained. A woman who brings constant tension, insecurity, or conflict starts to feel like a disruption rather than a desire. Not because she is a bad person, but because her energy does not align with the life he has created. He doesn't feel the need to fix her or save her because he learned that everyone must carry their own emotional weight. Time alone also removes desperation from a man's decisions. He no longer fears being single. He has already proven to himself that he can survive, grow, and even thrive without a partner. Because of that, he doesn't chase validation through attention. He doesn't tolerate disrespect just to feel chosen. If a woman pulls away, he lets her go. If she plays games, he disengages. Not out of ego, but out of self-respect. He understands that peace is not something you negotiate away. Living alone long enough also changes how a man communicates. He becomes more direct, more honest, and less patient with mind games. He values clarity because he spends so much time alone thinking. Vague intentions frustrate him. Mixed signals feel like wasted energy. When a woman speaks openly and acts consistently, it feels refreshing. When she hides behind manipulation or emotional tests, it feels unnecessary. He doesn't need drama to feel alive anymore. There's also a quiet emotional depth that develops in a man who has lived alone for a long time. He has faced boredom, loneliness, disappointment, and self-doubt without anyone to lean on. Those experiences humble him. They teach him empathy, even if he doesn't express it loudly. When a woman shares her struggles genuinely, he listens differently, not with the urge to fix, but with understanding. He respects vulnerability when it is honest, not performative. A man like this also notices effort more clearly because no one was there to support him during his hardest moments. He recognizes when someone shows up consistently. Small gestures carry more weight than grand promises. A woman who is emotionally present, supportive, and respectful stands out in a powerful way. He doesn't take her presence for granted because he knows what absence feels like. At the same time, he is careful. Living alone taught him the cost of disruption. He knows how long it took to rebuild himself, to find balance, to feel stable. So he moves slowly. He observes. He doesn't rush into commitment, not because he's afraid of it, but because he respects it. He understands that letting someone into his life means sharing space, time, and emotional access that once belonged only to him. When such a man chooses a woman, it is not based on fantasy. It is based on reality. He sees her flaws clearly, and he accepts them only if they dawn to disturb his peace or his values. He's not searching for perfection. He is searching for alignment. A woman who understands herself, respects boundaries, and communicates honestly feels safe to him. Safety, to a man who has lived alone long enough, is more attractive than intensity. He also stops viewing love as something that should consume him. Love becomes something that should support and strengthen, not overwhelm. He no longer believes that sacrificing his mental health is proof of commitment. He believes that mutual respect is the foundation of lasting connection. A woman who understands this does need to compete for his attention. She earns his trust through consistency. Once a man lives alone long enough, he sees a woman as a partner, not a project. He doesn't feel the need to control her, change her, or rescue her. He respects her autonomy because he learned to respect his own. And if he chooses her, it is because her presence makes his life better, calmer, and more meaningful than it already was on its own. Once a man lives alone long enough, he stops confusing company with connection. In the beginning, the absence of someone else feels like a problem that needs to be solved. He fills the silence with noise, distractions, and temporary interactions just to avoid being alone with his thoughts. But as time passes, that urge fades. He begins to understand that being alone is not the same as being empty. In that realization, something fundamental shifts inside him, and the way he sees women changes at its core. Living alone forces a man to confront himself honestly. There is no one to blame, no one to impress, and no one to hide behind. His strengths and weaknesses become impossible to ignore. He learns what frustrates him, what calms him, and what truly matters to him. This self-awareness becomes a filter through which he views every relationship. When a woman enters his life, he is no longer looking for escape. He is looking for alignment. A man who has lived alone long enough values emotional stability in a way that cannot be taught. He has experienced enough quiet nights to know that peace is not boring. It is precious. Loud emotions, unpredictable moods, and constant conflict no longer feel passionate. They feel draining. He watches how a woman handles her emotions, not to judge her, but to understand whether her emotional world is compatible with his. He knows that love without emotional safety eventually becomes a burden. Living alone also sharpens a man's sense of boundaries. When you are the sole guardian of your time, energy, and space, you become intentional about where you invest them. He notices how a woman responds to his boundaries. Does she respect them or does she take them personally? Does she see independence as strength or does she feel threatened by it? These reactions tell him more about long-term compatibility than attraction ever could. He also becomes less reactive. Alone, time teaches patience. When no one is there to immediately respond to your emotions, you learn to sit with them, process them, and let them pass. This inner calm changes how he handles conflict. He is less likely to argue just to win or to prove a point. He prefers resolution over dominance. When a woman approaches conflict with maturity, it deepens his respect for her. When she thrives on chaos, he distances himself. A man who has lived alone long enough also understands the weight of choice. He knows that inviting someone into his life is not casual. It means sharing routines, adjusting habits, and opening emotional doors he once closed for protection. Because of this, he becomes selective. Not cold, not distant, but discerning. He does fall in love quickly, but when he does, it is rooted in observation, not illusion. He begins to see attraction differently. Physical beauty may draw him in, but it does hold him. What holds him is how a woman speaks when she is upset, how she listens when he is quiet, and how she behaves when no one is rewarding her. He notices kindness, humility, and self-awareness. These traits resonate deeply because he had to develop them on his own. Living alone long enough also teaches a man accountability. He knows the cost of his decisions because he has lived with their consequences alone. This makes him appreciate a woman who takes responsibility for her actions. Blame, excuses, and avoidance feel foreign to the life he has built. He respects a woman who can admit when she's wrong, just as he had to learn to do with himself. There is also a quiet strength in a man who has lived alone for a long time. He doesn't need constant reassurance. He doesn't seek validation through control or attention. Because of that, he doesn't try to own a woman. He doesn't feel threatened by her independence or her success. In fact, he admires it. He understands what it takes to stand alone, and he respects anyone who can do the same. He also understands absence. Living alone means learning how to live without people who once mattered. This experience teaches him that love is not guaranteed by presence alone. It must be nurtured through respect, effort, and understanding. So when a woman is inconsistent, dismissive, or emotionally unavailable, he doesn't cling. He lets go. Not because he doesn't care, but because he knows what it costs to hold on to what disrupts his peace. When such a man chooses a woman, he is not looking for perfection. He is looking for peace, alignment, and emotional maturity. He wants someone who can share silence without discomfort, who can communicate without manipulation, and who can grow without competition. He sees a woman not as someone to complete him, but as someone to walk with him, side by side, each whole on their own. Once a man lives alone long enough, he stops living life on autopilot. The quiet forces him to slow down and notice things he once ignored. He begins to understand his habits, his emotions, and his reactions without anyone else influencing them. At first, this awareness can feel uncomfortable because there is no distraction from his flaws or his regrets. But over time, that discomfort turns into clarity. And with that clarity, the way he sees women begins to shift in a deep and lasting way. Living alone teaches a man that his time is valuable. Every hour is his to decide how to use, waste, or invest. When you spend enough time alone, you become selective about who gets access to that time. You no longer give it away just because someone is attractive or interested. So when a woman enters his life, he subconsciously evaluates whether her presence enhances his time or takes away from it. If being around her feels draining, demanding, or chaotic, he pulls back without guilt. He has already learned how peaceful life can be without unnecessary noise. A man who has lived alone long enough also learns the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness feels empty and restless, but solitude feels grounded and calm. Once he experiences solitude, he no longer fears being alone. That fear used to push him into relationships that were wrong for him. Relationships built on need instead of choice. Now, he chooses connection only when it feels meaningful. A woman is no longer a cure for loneliness. She is a companion to a life that already stands on its own. He also becomes deeply aware of emotional patterns. Alone time gives him space to reflect on past relationships, mistakes, and repeated cycles. He begins to notice what he tolerated before that cost him his peace. This reflection makes him more cautious. When he meets a woman, he doesn't just hear what she says. He watches what she does. He notices consistency, accountability, and emotional awareness. He understands that words are easy, but behavior reveals everything. Living alone long enough teaches a man self-regulation. When no one is there to comfort him immediately,